Hello, 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 and welcome to Kindred Skulls. Who are these ghost-like figures appearing on screen and in your ear? It's two voices you haven't heard in some time. It's me, Gregg Blake, and Matt Freese, my friend and co-host. How are you this morning, Matt?
I'm doing all right. It's been a minute since we've been on. I'm glad to get back into this.
It,
Just the last couple months have been extremely hectic for I think all three of us.
yeah,
The
it's a
holiday season,
surprise episode. It's a
yeah,
shocker. It's hey, we're jumping in. We're jumping into the off season
we're
finally.
we're not dead. We still exist and we still plan to record podcasts. It's just
Yeah,
a hectic time. So, fun
exactly,
stuff.
exactly. But so our apologies for the absence. Let's just talk briefly about setting aside the schedule stuff. You know, I don't know about you, but I found that season to be very draining. It was a very draining season to be a fan. It was tough towards the end of there to find
Yeah.
anything that I even wanted to talk about with my friends. Like my dad would text me like a day or two after the game, be like, "Oh, that sucked," and I'd be like, "Yep, that sucked." It's like normally we're texted. We call each other immediately. It was just a year where it just was really hard to like. I didn't find a lot of enjoyment in it. How
I
about you, Matt? How'd you feel?
I would say that I felt pretty good about it for the majority of the season, and like up to the Raiders game, obviously it was very exciting, and even the Bengals game was like a fun, good game. And I thought there were fun things to talk about that happened over the last month of the season, right? But like at the end of the day, it just got so frustrating with the losses to the Lions and the Packers specifically, right? When you're ending your season on that note, and it's hard, right? We had backup quarterbacks in there who really, like Nick Mullins was so up and down, right?
Up
And
and down.
then
Yeah.
Jaron Hall, his half was just really, really disappointing and frustrating, right? And it's like all the stuff that the team had uh, issues with all year, just continued all year. And then the thing it had going for it, it seemed like the defense just kind of collapsed down the stretch, right? So it was just like extremely frustrating. I didn't want to listen to anybody talk about the Vikings. Like I have a rotation of podcasts that I listen to, right? And like I listen to some NFL, I listen to it's probably about a 50-50 split of like NFL and Viking stuff, right? In
Yeah.
terms of the amount of time I dedicate to it. And the last 4 weeks of the season, it was like, all right, I'm gonna watch the tape on this game. I'm gonna write an article about this game, and that is it. Like I'm done interacting with this game after that because it was just infuriating. So yeah, I agree. I agree with that.
I'm the same way. I have a rotation of podcasts too, some that I've been listening to for many, many years. And towards the end of the year there, I was just like, you know what? I need a break from all this. Like, I don't even want to like think about it right now. I was the same way. So I definitely relate to that. But it is what it is. We're here though. We're here. Let's
Hmm.
talk a little Vikings. I think we've had plenty of time to put some salve on our wounds and you know think about the future here. And I think there's a lot of discourse online about the future of the team and amongst friend groups.
Yeah.
Obviously you talked a little bit about the defense kind of collapsing there towards the end of the year, and I know you have seen buzz about our roster situation, and there's a lot of question marks right now with the team, especially on the defensive side of the ball. We've got the offseason kind of in our sights here, Matt. What are some things that you want to address with this team right now? Like off, let's just focus on defense for a second.
Yeah, so the defensive thing I think is interesting, right? The collapse happened at the end of the season, and really it was the final four games, right? The Bengals, the Lions, and the Packers, right? And I think we can say that part of the reason for the collapse is they were playing really good opponents, right? Like you have obviously the Bengals didn't have Joe Burrow, but like Jake Browning, I guess was so mad at the Vikings that he turned on into a heater at the end of that game. Like he was playing legitimately well in that game, and obviously you just had like T. Higgins dunking on that one touchdown, which really should have been an interception, right? And it was just kind of like a couple fluky things, but also the defense structurally was kind of exposed by that point, and one of the things they hit on was dig routes over the middle of the field. up to that, we missed recapping the Raiders game, right, where they shut out the Raiders. I think you look at some of the opposing offenses they played, and part of it was bad game plans. I don't think the Raiders had necessarily as bad of a game plan as the Bears did. Like we go back to the Bears game, which was the last game we covered, and they just had the worst game plan in the world. And of course, the Raiders hire Luke Getsy, the offensive coordinator, put together that game plan, which was just absolutely insane to me. It shows how broken I think the NFL hiring cycle is that Luke Getsy got another OC job, because the Bears, as a reminder, ran 15 screens, which is the Vikings' primary, like what they're primarily looking for when they give you a blitz mug, is they're looking to take away a screen. They ran 15 of those without even ever trying to build off of a single one. They didn't try any sort of fake or anything off of that. It was absolutely insane. I've never seen a game plan that is that poorly constructed. They also left Daniil Hunter unblocked in protection like multiple times that game.
I
Um,
remember you calling that out specifically. I remember
so
that.
it's just like, to me, some of the defensive success was bad offenses responding to what the Vikings were doing, and it is kind of interesting to me that the defense got bad right around the time a Kevin Seifert article came out describing the defense, right? And I want to put more faith in opposing offenses than an ESPN article that basically just said, yeah, the Vikings are playing zone behind all of these blitz mugs they run instead of man, and opponents think they're running man, which, if you listen to this podcast, we talked about how much man they were not running like all season. So like you would think somebody's able to put on like 4 games of tape, which is what opposing offensive coordinators typically watch, and determine, oh, they're playing zone, like they're dropping into like Tampa 2 and like some weird cover 3 invert stuff all year, and that's what they're doing when they're dropping out of these blitz mugs. You think somebody would have been able to figure that out, right? And start to attack
Maybe
those
maybe it
weaknesses.
was Kevin Seifert. Maybe it was Kevin Seifert in an article, or maybe Kevin Seifert is a listener, man. Maybe he heard you.
Kevin Seifert obviously is not a listener of this podcast. If you listened to what he put out, if you saw what he put out as an article like last week, so I'm not worried about that.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about
And for those,
Kevin Seifert individually having like breaking scheme things. He just has access and is able to talk to people. Yeah, so I had a little blip there in recording, but getting right back into it, the Vikings defense, if opposing offensive coordinators saw an ESPN article, right, which guys read the media, so it's certainly possible that this is what the case was, and realized what the Vikings were doing from that article, like that just makes my faith in how offensive coordinators operate and like do their jobs go way downhill, because it like the Vikings didn't change schematically what they were doing on offense. Opposing offenses figured out how to attack it. Um, and that's like with dagger concepts and stuff over the middle of the field. And I think that's a question for the Vikings. So they ran pretty much exclusively zone, right? And even their quote unquote man coverage looks a lot of the time are like their zero blitz looks, where it's an off man that kind of plays out like zone and is kind of like a pattern matchy type of thing, because you're expecting the ball to get out so quickly that you don't play like straight normal press man or something like that. Um, so I think the problem is the Vikings didn't feel comfortable going to any sort of man coverage changeups because of the state of their cornerback room. And obviously, like Byron Murphy apparently got hurt during the Bengals game and played the rest of that game. I think, I didn't go back and thought he had a particularly bad game in that game, but obviously that impacted it. Caleb Evans just kind of spiraled into somebody that really wasn't playable at corner by the end of the season. So, and I thought he had a generally pretty good year, but it just kind of snowballed on him, and he looked lost in coverage relatively frequently over the last few weeks. So I think having more answers at corner, and that could be developing guys, but like having more answers at corner is going to be huge for this defense in terms of they just need to be able to play man coverage sometimes. And if you're not able to just play straight up play man sometimes, you're going to have problems, because all zone coverages have weaknesses. And when you're sending more blitzes than normal, your zones are going to have more weaknesses than normal. I also think linebackers in coverage, as good as I thought Ivan Pace and Jordan Hicks played, like both of them still weren't good in terms of coverage players. They were much better going forward and attacking the run and attacking the quarterback. So maybe adding a guy who can play a little bit more coverage there makes sense, or maybe Ivan Pace develops or something into somebody who has a better spatial feel for coverage. But that was something we identified. I feel like I identified way back watching him in the draft, in that he just wasn't asked to do a lot of coverage in college, and he wasn't asked to do a lot of coverage this past year in terms of complex stuff. So it's something that he needs to add to his toolbox to become a complete linebacker. Um, So that was just kind of my mini rant on the defense and kind of where it was at and maybe what we can look forward to moving forward. Also, having a pass rusher besides Daniel Hunter who could win one-on-one would be very critical for this defense too. Like that obviously helps.
We've seen that can work really well for us. So, um, okay, so that's the defensive side of the ball. Obviously, that's where we have the most holes.
Hmm.
The least talent, the most that needs fixing. Um, let's just talk a little bit about let's talk about the quarterback thing, Matt.
Yeah.
Let's touch on it. Let's discuss it. Obviously, we won't spend a lot of time on the emotional aspects of the Kirk decision. Let's just talk about the money for a second. There seems to be like kind of two schools of thought about this. There's a group of people in the discussion who think probably there's some truth to this that Kirk Cousins is going to want maximum money and or multiple years. And there's another school of thought that's like we could bring him back on a short deal or a team friendly deal of some kind. And there's not a lot of wiggle room in between there, setting aside whether you want him gone or not. Okay, there's some
Hmm.
people that don't even want to bring him back at all. Um, we're not going to go there. Just in terms of the money, the contract discussion that's happening. Do you see another school of thought here, or those seem to be the two disagreements I see most online, at least?
So I mean, in terms of the money, I think there's a pretty relevant point here, and we're not the first people to say this. Like it's out there, but it's a very detailed part of how the CBA works and how contracts work that a lot of people don't really, from a national level, like aren't going to really get all that deep into. But the reporting I have seen, and this came from an Eric Eager article specifically that states this. I think the original report was from Andrew Kramer or somebody who covers the Vikings. I don't remember exactly who it was, but there are people in media who have access to the actual text of the contracts that the players get. And one of the interesting things with void years, which is what Kirk has on his deal to push out the cap hits, is in the void year physically, you have to put a salary down. You have to put a number in those years that says this is what the salary is. This became the first time I saw this publicized was with Taysom Hill for the Saints specifically, where in his contract he had a different salary if he was considered a tight end than if he was considered a quarterback. Uh, for void year purposes, and the Saints are obviously like the originators of void years in terms of doing that sort of thing. So Kirk's salary in his void years is $42.5 million per void year. There is a CBA restriction where you cannot renegotiate a contract to increase salary twice in 12 calendar months. The Vikings renegotiated Kirk's contract to increase his salary in last season, right? Like in the offseason last year. So it was before March. So
Right.
they're not able to offer him more than $42.5 million per year on any sort of contract that he signs. So I've seen some that Kirk's asking for 45. I think that was just kind of an unfounded report that was speculation that says he can ask for over that. And I've seen some talking heads like a Dan Orlovsky comment on Pat McAfee's show hit big yesterday that the Vikings can't afford both Kirk and Justin Jefferson. Um, Now, I don't think that comes from a place of knowledge of anything. I think that's salary cap speculation, which isn't true. We can get into the salary cap implications of extending both Kirk and JJ and Daniil Hunter when we talk about that later today. But I think the reality of the situation is Kirk coming off an Achilles injury is probably going to look for the 40, I'm sorry, not 45, $40 million range. Like that would to me be the high end of Kirk's market. I do think you're going to have to fully guarantee any deal you give Kirk,
Yeah.
like it has
And
been in the past, or at
and
least
let's be
guarantee it for
clear,
2 years.
right? And let's just really quickly. I think there's a misconception that I think it's a misconception. Maybe it's true that Kirk will be willing to play for something like 30 million or do some crazy discount because of the Achilles, because he just loves playing for the Vikings or whatever. And it's just like, I think that's like you're living in a dream world. Like, I just can't imagine he's going to take more than the absolute
And
maximum he can get.
to be fair to that line of thinking, Kirk has said specifically this season that the amount of money he's getting is not the most important thing at that point when it was previously. And he's always tried to maximize the money. So I do think there is the ability for Kirk to, you know, take a slightly lesser deal with the Vikings than what he could absolutely get on the open market. But I don't think he's going to take a $10 million a year discount to try to get to try to stay with the Vikings and win a Super Bowl and stay here or whatever. So like
So- okay.
if he's splitting hairs between 35 million a year and 37 million a year, he might stick with the Vikings, but other than
The
that, like
only
he's not going to
way
go cheap.
the only way he's going to do that is if he tacks on 2 extra guaranteed years. That's the only way that's happening. Like it's either going to be the most money possible, or it's going to be give me also extra years that are guaranteed. So no matter what, I'm walking out of here with another $150 million or whatever. Like that's the only way I can see where he's going to take quote unquote less money. I just don't see it happening.
Yeah,
Well, you know,
I mean, I think again, we're like the value of Kirk staying in Minnesota, right? I think has some level of money, but it's not a lot, right? It's going to be like a million or two a year difference that he would get compared to what he can get on the open market. I think is what he's going to say. He's not going to take a $10 million discount to stay with the Minnesota Vikings. And at the point where it's a million or two a year that you're saving, like that's a negligible cap impact, right? That's like one minimum salary player on the roster is $1 million roughly. So it really, you're not saving that much money if you're the Minnesota Vikings.
so yeah. So we'll just leave that out there. People can make their own, continue to make their own conclusions. We won't know anything for another month. So,
But
um,
so let's say, Greg, in this Kirk discussion, we're talking about the amount of money he potentially wants to make. You're the GM of the Minnesota Vikings. Let's say Kirk wants in the 35 to $40 million range. I think that's the most reasonable contract that the Vikings can actually give Kirk, right? And let's say he wants a minimum of 2 years. Um, what do you do if you're the Minnesota Vikings, given the crossroads that you have in front of you?
I demand that my no trade clause is removed. So that's no longer part of the discussion. We have the right to trade you in year 2 if we want to.
Hmm.
And if they agree to that, I think as a GM, objectively, not as
Not as
Greg,
Greg.
not as Greg, the guy who doesn't want to watch this dude anymore. Said it, as a GM, objectively, if I can get 2 years and get rid of that no trade clause, it's a total win-win for me because it's not going to sit on the cap forever. And I now have the ability to, if he bounces back off this Achilles and he plays well, I we'll talk about this in a minute. But if I go out and get a youngster to sit behind him, I've got a year of Kirk with the youngster on the bench, and if he proves that he can still play, then I can move him for an asset in the following year. That's a win-win for everybody. Everybody fucking wins in that scenario. Maybe even Greg wins in that scenario. Maybe even Greg is happy in that scenario. Uh, and then worst case, we have this extra year. Maybe he wobbles or he's not as good or whatever, and we can still move him for something in year 2. But I need that mobility in year 2. He can't be an anchor on this roster, especially if it doesn't work out and he's not as good or whatever. I got to have options if I'm the GM.
Yeah.
And
I,
yeah,
I think that that is exactly what I would suggest as I think the Vikings preferably we can extend Kirk. I think drafting a young quarterback early in the draft, whether or not Kirk is extended, is a must. Like for me looking at this situation, I think you need to have a plan to say, okay, Kirk isn't the same after coming back from this Achilles injury. Like that's a risk. Modern medical science is really good, and I think there's a pretty high chance that he's able to be the same. But we
he
don't
was
know
dancing.
ultimately.
We
He
saw
was
him dancing
dancing
this
with
week.
Cam Jordan, so we got that mobility coming up. But also, an aging player with the contract, I think, is a huge question mark. But to your point, actually, bringing up the no trade clause, that was something I was going to bring up. I think you need to get rid of that no trade clause to be able to help make this a successful deal for the Vikings.
This is the one time in Kirk's entire career at this point where the team he's negotiating with can actually take advantage of him. Okay, like he's always had the advantage, and I mean, if you look at this guy's
Hmm.
agent, is incredible. Like probably the best agent I've ever seen. Like he won every one of Kirk's deals, every single one he's
Yep.
won. Everything that you could win, he's won it. He's this agent is one of the forefront agents negotiating guaranteed contracts. That's how crazy
Yeah.
successful Kirk's
Yeah.
negotiations have been. He's actually on the ropes this time. So if you as a GM really want to bring this dude back, you better win something in a deal discussion with Kirk Cousins. Win something, please. So getting rid of the no trade clause, getting 2 years to sort of deal with transition at quarterback. There's a lot of wins there. Even if Greg the fan doesn't love it, I think for a GM, it's a lot of wins there.
Yeah, and look, there's a world where the Vikings take a quarterback in the first round and he's Trey Lance, right? He's someone who you thought had a pretty good shot at being successful and just clearly wasn't ready as a player. And having a 2-year flexibility with Kirk helps you out there because you can still be a serious team, in what is that, 2025, I guess, if your quarterback just flat out stinks, right? Like, and that's
Yep.
always a risk of drafting a guy at quarterback.
Yep.
So, I guess with that plan in mind, like, and there are other paths the Vikings could go down, right? They could say, all right, we want to rip this Kirk Band-Aid off entirely. We are done with him and we want to move on to the next portion of our franchise. We'll bring in a Jacoby Brissett or somebody as a kind of uh, bridge quarterback, and we'll draft it. We must draft a guy early in the draft, right?
Yep.
There's a world where the Vikings say, you know what, we're happy with Kirk and we want to extend him for 3 years. I don't think either of us are gonna love that world, but you know, those are kind of the options in front of
Yeah.
them. So there is certainly a world where they don't draft a quarterback, but I think we'll have that answer after free agency starts, right? And I'd really
Yeah.
like to kind of have it the other way around where we get to draft before free agency, right? Because it's certainly possible, like the top three quarterbacks in the draft, and they don't like any of the other three. The top three quarterbacks go 1, 2, 3, and they don't like anybody else. So there's really no path for them to get a viable quarterback that they like in the draft.
Well,
So
that's kind of what happened to us last year. You know, we
yeah,
we we had a guy we liked supposedly, a couple of guys maybe, and then we couldn't get up there. Supposedly we were trying to get up there for
yeah.
AR and we couldn't.
The
And then it
the
was just like,
the most solid source reporting I've seen says that the Vikings only liked Bryce Young, and once they couldn't do that, they didn't go up. But I've seen reporting I would say is less solid that says the Vikings were all in on Anthony Richardson. So I don't know really what the truth of that
that
is,
AR,
but
the Richardson thing's been around.
yeah.
I kind of buy it, but mostly that's because I want to buy it, I guess.
And the Vikings couldn't get up there, right? It's
Right.
pricey to move up in the draft. And even
Well,
even
we're
that, like the Cardinals basically were probably choosing at 3 between the deal that the Vikings were offering them and the deal that the Texans were offering them for the Texans to go up and get Will Anderson, right? And they just preferred like 2 first-round picks. The Texans picks they thought was going to be lower in 2024, even though it turned out very much not to be. And then also, like, I think they got a high second out of that deal last year in the draft as well. So, like, they got a lot of capital to
a
move
lot of
back to
capital.
12, which is a lot easier to go back up to 6, which is what they eventually did, than moving back to where we were at 23. So, we
And
could have offered the house and the Cardinals could have just said no.
right. We're dancing around it here. So we finally got through the Kirk thing. We did it.
Yeah.
Now we're sort of dancing around. We're talking about offseason plans. We're talking about the quarterback position, and we've already brought up what both of us kind of assume and hope
Yeah.
happens is that we go get our guy this year. Um, there's a lot of interesting candidates. The even as far down as the third tier has some guys you can get. There's things to get excited about with pretty
Hmm.
much every single prospect. Even if uh, you've got a red flag system for yourself and you've got red flags on certain guys or whatever. Even the guys that you could put a red flag on, they still have something that you can point to and be like, oh, that's pretty exciting though. Like like Sam Hartman, for example. He's a really kind of a more of a Joe Burrow type in terms of like pocket guy with a little bit of mobility. But he plays with a ton of swagger, and he's very accurate with the ball, and it's kind of fun to watch. So even if that ends up being your guy or whatever late in the round, you can point to something about him that kind of gets you excited. I'm just pulling him out of a hat. There's a bunch of dudes.
Okay. Okay,
And
Greg. Let's talk about the top six quarterbacks. I think that's who people want to hear about.
well,
Um,
all I'm trying to illustrate is that it's a year with a lot of really interesting prospects, and your team going out and getting one. Obviously, we want to be in the top six, and in particular, let's talk about trading up, because I think
yeah.
that's the bugaboo topic, and has been for many years in the Vikings fan base, but definitely more than ever this year. I think um, we're sitting at 11. Matt, what do you think about the idea of trading up? Let's say it's kind of chalk. It's Caleb Williams 1, Drake May 2, Jaden Daniels 3. Uh,
Yeah.
would you want to trade up for one of those three guys? Would you be willing to, without naming a guy for now?
I mean, I think I'd trade up. Yeah, absolutely in the draft. Like, I don't really care about the cost of trading up if you're getting the quarterback, right? Obviously, you may set yourself behind if you don't hit on the quarterback you try to get when you trade up. But guess what? If you don't have a good quarterback, you're not going to be a good football team, right? So as soon as you hit on a quarterback, you will be a good football team, almost guaranteed, right? I mean, look at where the Texans were last year to what they were this year. And maybe part of that's D'Amico Ryans and a culture change and a defense that came in, but the vast majority of it is they hit on CJ Stroud, right? Like,
Absolutely.
look at all of the draft capital that the Bears have been able to use over the last couple of years. And granted, they have more this year, and they're still not a good football team because they weren't hitting on the draft picks that they made. Um, you know, if you look at the Super Bowl teams, they're littered with young players where they hit on the draft picks, right? If you look at the conference championship teams, they're littered with young players where they hit on the draft picks, particularly the Lions. But they also have a quarterback who's steady enough in Jared Goff to get them there, right? But he wasn't good enough. He wasn't innovative enough to get them past the 49ers when they needed him to make a play, right? So, Jared Goff's in that Kirk Cousins range where he's a
Yep.
good enough quarterback to be good, but he's not a good enough quarterback to be great, right? So
Yep.
the Vikings are trying to get out of that range, and try to add somebody who can do that. If they trade up a bunch of assets and miss on the pick, they missed on the pick, and it's going to be 2 years of terrible with a quarterback who's not any good, and then you're going to have to try again. But guess what? You're going to have to try again anyway if you didn't trade up for a quarterback, and you also got a guy who was bad at 11, right? So, or at the end of the first round, or whatever you want to do. Like, you're going to have to try to figure out a quarterback somehow. So I have no problem with the cost of trading up to be able to go ahead and trade up.
Yeah. This is going to be one of those podcasts where it's impossible for me to provide a counterpoint. Okay.
Yeah.
Matt and I are in lockstep on this. I think I got there a lot earlier than a lot of people in terms of my satisfaction and like what I want to see the team do. I've been begging for this for years. Uh, and I think it's reached a point where the Minnesota Vikings presumably are not going to pick this high again anytime soon. Okay, like we're too talented, I think, for that to be a year in year out thing. We're at 11. This is striking range for those top three picks, and especially when you consider, um, let's leave the Bears out of the conversation. I don't think anybody has any clue what the Bears are going to do. Okay, there's a lot of assumptions made about trading Fields and everything. I think the Bears are complete wild cards, man. They could draft Marvin Harrison Jr. for all we know. Okay, they need receivers. There's a generational receiver
Yeah.
sitting there at the top of the draft, a guy that everyone universally expects amazing things from. Super physical, super talented, son of a super duper star. He's got everything you could possibly need sitting there in a package waiting to be drafted. If they believe in Justin Fields, they know they need a receiver. It could be Marvin Harrison. You have no idea. So Set them aside. You look at slot 2 and slot 3 are both teams that have new head coaches that are defensive oriented coaches with defenses that are in shambles and rosters that are in complete shambles across the board. You can make a very strong argument that neither one of those teams is ready to draft a quarterback. It's not the right time necessarily. They don't have a roster around the kid you bring in to help them succeed. The argument can definitely be made. I think either one of those teams could be trade down candidates, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, yeah, I think that's fair. Because
I
I
think it's very
also I also think that even the wide receiver talent at the top of the draft, as good as Marvin Harrison Jr. is, like Malik Neighbors is freaking awesome. Like
right.
Roma Dunze is I'm not as high as on Roma Dunze as I am on Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr., but like a lot of people are, right? So if they look at the draft and say the separation between these wide receivers really isn't that high, and we want to do like the Dolphins did, where they traded down and then went back up to get Jalen Waddle, even though Jamar Chase and that went in the interim and Kyle Pitts went in the interim, right? Like if they want to do something like that, the trading back to 11, I mean, the Dolphins traded back to 12, right? Like that could give you some of the capital there. The Cardinals, same thing. They traded back to 12 and then they traded back up. Like that seems to be kind of what's in vogue if you're at that early spot and you need extra talent on your roster. You pick up a bunch of extra picks, you send one of the first round picks, future first that you got to the team you want to trade back up with to still get a blue chip player and like the at number 6, it's just been kind of coincidental, but that's how it's worked.
So essentially, you net, a bunch of additional assets at very little cost, still get a player you love, and you build your
Yeah.
roster, which is
Right.
what both of those teams need to do. They need to build their rosters out. Anyway, so let's
Now,
say it's one
we
of those
just
two.
went on a rant saying even if you build your roster out, it doesn't matter if you don't have a quarterback. So that's the counterpoint to that whole thing, right?
Absolutely,
And what?
it's a great counterpoint. I agree with you. I'm just saying I think there's a misconception that we know for sure
Yeah,
what those top 3 teams are going to do. I just want to illustrate there's a lot of ways to skin a cat in this league, and when you need as much talent as all 3 of those teams do, but
mhm.
especially the second and third teams do, um, there's every reason to at least consider trading down. So
So
let's say the
theor-
option is there.
right.
Let's say the
Theoretically,
option is there.
every single one of those guys is in play. Is what we're trying
Yeah.
to say here.
This is my preamble just to build a foundation
Yeah.
under the topic we want to actually discuss. Let's say the pick is, the draft pick is there. We can trade up. It's going to cost us that first. It's going to cost us next year's first, couple of seconds, maybe even throw in a player that we feel we can let go. Who knows? It's whatever the package is. We both agree it's going to be worth it, whatever the package is. Just pay the price. The team has never done this in my lifetime. We have never moved up into the top 5 for a quarterback. It's never happened in the history of the team. We have a very small amount of guys we've ever drafted in the first. We've never done it, and I would like to see it. And I will fall in love with the idea if we do it. I really think it's how you win in this league, Matt, like you already really illustrated very well. So let's say we do it, and let's pretend it's pick 2 so that we have a couple of options to talk about. I'm just curious, Matt, of at this point, and you know my answer. Caleb's off the board. Between Drake May and Jaden Daniels, who excites you most? Who's the guy that you hope we trade up for in this scenario?
That's actually a really interesting question to me. Um, I I guess between those two specifically, my answer would be Drake May, but I kind of have this as guys I would like to sit a year and guys I would be comfortable with playing right away. And I'm actually more comfortable playing Jaden Daniels in year 1 than I am playing Drake May in year 1. Now, that's not exactly how this works, right? Like we can say oh, this player should sit a year or they need to sit a year to learn all they want. And they may not necessarily need that. Like Josh Allen obviously wasn't good his first 2 seasons. Like it's important to remember with Josh Allen that he wasn't good, but he eventually
Right.
became good. And I think part of the reason he became good is because he was able to play through it those first 2 years and he had the supporting staff around him.
They had a
Um,
whole season to look at and go, here's where you need to improve if you're going to survive.
yeah. And
Yeah.
obviously it's part of the size. I think it's part being an athletic like white quarterback, right? That draft media kind of compares Drake May to Josh Allen. But I think the play style comp of a little bit of chaos going on at all times, right? Like the brain's just kind of doing the Benny Hill theme at all times, and then usually something awesome happens when that's Josh Allen, right? Usually in college something awesome happens when that's Drake May. So I do think that style may be a little bit more, they can play through it initially because they're not going to get down when they make mistakes than say a Caleb Williams, who I think is more in the and like these comparisons are ridiculous, right? Like I don't think it's fair to compare guys to Josh Allen and have the expectation for Drake May to be he becomes a Josh Allen or a Justin Herbert. I don't think it's fair to compare a Caleb Williams to a Patrick Mahomes, which is what people are doing.
I can't stand it that people make that jump when we're talking about comparisons. No, whoever makes comparisons is ever saying this is exactly who this guy is going to be. It's just to frame the conversation. It's just conversation framing. You're telling us that there's reminiscent qualities of his play style and maybe his career trajectory could be similar. That's all you're saying. Anyway, yes, we're on the same page.
Um, so like so like with Caleb Williams, I think he is on the play style of a Patrick Mahomes or Jordan Love. I think you have a guy who shows an understanding of the offense and the concepts that are being run on the offense, and sometimes plays a little schoolyard with that understanding. So that's a pretty nuanced thing. But the thing with Patrick Mahomes is that it's not that he is out there doing crazy Josh Allen things all the time. It's he understands how the offense is trying to manipulate the defense and will sometimes play out of the standard structure of the offense to make a play because he knows he can pull the strings of the defense and make something happen. I think that is part of what you get with Caleb Williams as a player. And notably, both Jordan Love, who I think kind of did that a little bit against the Vikings or against the Cowboys in particular. Like, how many times was Jordan Love kind of falling back, throwing off his back foot? And he has the arm talent to be able to do that. Notably, I think Caleb Williams also has that level of arm talent and just threw to a wide open receiver in that Cowboys Packers playoff game, right? I think his ability to extend the play and let that breathe, he knew that guy was eventually going to come open there, which I think is a pretty good sign for Jordan Love. I think there are still accuracy issues with Jordan Love that maybe are a little bit more concerning. I don't want to be like on a Vikings podcast singing the praises of Jordan Love. Like I don't think it's a surefire thing yet, but
Yeah,
Greg
fuck
does
Jordan
want to
Love.
sing the praises of Jordan Love. I know he
Fuck
does.
Jordan Love.
Excellent. That's wonderful. But like I think those guys benefited from sitting and learning about the NFL game for a year before being thrown into the fire. Because what happens when guys get thrown into the fire and they make mistakes early is there's a lot of criticism immediately. I mean, look at how people feel about Bryce Young, who was not good last year. Everybody has entirely written his career off, and I don't think that's entirely fair for him after 1 year, even if he did have a very bad rookie year, right? So, like, I think insulating those guys from that can be helpful, and I think that's true of Caleb Williams. For Jaden Daniels, he's a guy I think has to play right away, and the reason I think he has to play right away is age. I don't I don't like drafting older quarterbacks. This is something we talked about in the lead up to last year's draft as well. I believe
Yep.
particularly with Hendon Hooker, who just wasn't a good quarterback in general, but besides that, he was old. Um,
Yes.
so but the thing is, like Jaden Daniels, I think has an NFL ready game. So if the Vikings aren't able to come to an agreement with Kirk Cousins, honestly, Jaden Daniels might be the guy I want the most. So it does kind of get modified with those top three.
Hmm, absolutely. Yeah. So you know my answer here. I think no matter what situation we have with Cousins, uh, and assuming we can get up to two. for the sake of discussion. For me, it's been about Drake May for months and months and months. I just can't shake what I
So
see.
let's throw Caleb in there. Where are you, Caleb, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, order of priority?
It's so hard for me, Matt, because Caleb is much closer to, like, I've daydreamed about the big swing, right? The
Yeah.
generational prospect, and the Minnesota Vikings having a chance at that kind of player. I've dreamed about that, you know, many years. I mean, before even Kirk came along. It's always been a dream of mine. It's why I still have a candle for Teddy, because it was the closest we've ever come to doing that. Trading up and drafting a guy with talent, and potential. So, uh, I it's hard for me because Caleb Williams is clearly the biggest swing in the draft. If he works out, if he figures all of his stuff out and he doesn't act like a total Looney Tunes, and he's actually like a leader on the team and everything, um, boy, I mean, he can do some things on the football field that are just that you don't find everywhere. It's very, everyone does this, but it's Mahomes like, and it's his creativity, the angles that he can make the ball go, make it, the way he can make the ball drop into perfect spots, or he can get it there quickly and hit really tight windows between zones. He can make every type of throw, and he can do it with flair. And he's one of those players that's you're on the edge of your seat waiting to see what exciting thing he can do next. It's a rare thing, but I I when I watch Drake May, I think I think he just needs a little more time to develop, and there might be an even better player, an even more effective football player in there than Caleb might be. I, I
So
I'm very torn between the two of them right now. If I'm being totally honest with you, if we moved up to one and it was actually for Drake May instead of Caleb Williams, I wouldn't even bat an eye.
so if we moved up to one, who are you picking?
You're lawyering me, aren't you? Because I because I didn't answer the question. All right. The answer is I I feel a little sad because of how in love I have become with Drake May, but I think I still take Caleb Williams.
I'm taking Caleb, but I think honestly, to your point, I'm happy with both answers. In that case, I like honestly, if the Vikings get any three of Caleb Williams, Drake May, or Jaden Daniels, I think that's a solid answer. Like I definitely have questions about Drake May and his process, and I don't think he's a particularly clean prospect. But I think we've seen guys who weren't particularly clean prospects be extremely successful in the NFL. And if it all comes down to the mental side of the game, right? Which is something that we don't really have access to, especially as people who are completely outside of any sort of draft media or anything. But
Yep.
also, like the teams struggle to get right on a constant basis, right? Like it's Sam Darnold and Zach Wilson, right? I guess that's kind of crapping on the Jets there, but like just obviously huge misses in that regard. Trey Lance, huge miss in that
Yep.
regard, right?
Yep.
So it's an inexact science at best, and we can't really know with these guys. So I think rather than getting overly attached for me to a specific player or saying this guy can't do this, I'm going to let it be, I like these guys for these reasons and I don't like these guys for these reasons. So let's get to some guys we maybe don't like as much,
All
right?
right.
Because
Yep.
after the top three, which there's a very clear scenario where all three teams in the top three are like, we need a quarterback. We are not trading out for anything. And
Right.
Williams, Daniels, and May are all gone, right? They're just not an option. Who do you
Yep.
like best of the JJ McCarthy, Michael Penix, and Bo Nix continuum?
Um,
And are you taking any of them at 11? Are you willing to take any of them at 11? Or would you be like, I would just rather take another player? Under the assumption that we have Kirk, right? And we haven't shoehorned
yeah,
ourselves into reaching on somebody, right?
yeah.
Like, are you sitting there and taking any at 11? Are you like, I would only take him if I trade down? Are you like, if I really have the intel where I think one of these guys is going to get taken, I would trade up for him?
Right. So you and I have we've talked all year about this.
Yeah.
So you know that I've repeatedly said if the Vikings do this, if we finally go and get our guy, I'm going to fall in line immediately, and
Hmm.
they're going to be my guy too, and I'm totally excited. And I really will do that. I'm keeping an open mind no matter what because I want to be happy, even if it's the guy, not the guy I picked. Like a good example is I was as down on Will Levis last year as about any prospect I ever have been over the years. I just
For the record,
thought
Will Levis was not good at football last year. We were both down on Will Levis. Will Levis was not good at football for the Titans. I mean, he had a couple bombs, and that was what he did in school. Is he threw absolute bombs, right?
okay,
But
you're
he was one of the
undermining my
worst
point.
quarterbacks on
Hold
the
on.
quarterback charting. He was worse than Bryce Young from quarterback charting. Sorry.
Okay. But you're undermining my point. I have not given up on my hate of Will Levis yet. But I just want to say that he came on the field and he did some stuff, which is more than I ever expected from him. Okay,
Yeah,
I was thinking Zach Wilson level, can't even throw the fucking ball, like that kind of thing. And I think he did even more than that, at least in his stint there. Look, the point I'm trying to make is I'm wrong often. I liked Trey Lance, and I still clung to Jordan Love, and I ended up being right about that, but I was wrong in the beginning. So I don't know any more than anybody else. So when I say something judgmental about this next tier of guys, it's not because I think I know better than the team, and I will fall in line if they end up being one of them. But I don't think I would draft any of those guys at 11. At 11, my hope at the time was for a Quinn Ewers to come out or someone like that. That was I was like, okay, if we don't have those top three options, at least I know Quinn will be around and he was kind of my next dude. So I'm not as in love with that next group. And my hope would be that we pull one of either two moves in that situation. We take a defender who's like elite that is only got pushed down because of the QBs and stuff. We haven't had a big, strong defensive tackle in a while, a game
and
changer.
for this class, it's quarterbacks, wide receivers, and offensive line are considered the top players in the class. And we don't need an offensive tackle. We don't need a wide receiver.
Right.
So, assuming all the quarterbacks are gone, it's going to be a lot of wide receivers, offensive line. The top defenders are going to follow the Minnesota Vikings at 11, at least the way it's looking right now.
Exactly. And thank you for putting context around what I'm saying. There's a player there that we could get at 11 who's a top 5 type of player in most other drafts. So I will not turn my nose up, assuming that we can't get into the top 3. Those top 3 quarterbacks are not there. Uh, we're sitting at 11 and one of these incredible defensive players drops to us. I'm not going to cry about it, especially if the move is then to move back into the end of the first round and take whichever QB we like that's still there,
Mm-hmm.
or move up, into the 20s or something like that. That's move number 1 to me in that scenario. And then move number 2 um, is one that Kwesi would never do. And no fan right now at this moment of hype, off-season hype, is going to agree with me. But honestly, what I'd probably do is I think I would trade away the pick, move down to where I still think I can get a defender, take all those extra picks, and start Nick Mullins and just crater this season.
Amazing. I actually, so low key, I don't hate Nick Mullins as like the quote unquote bridge quarterback that the Vikings put in because he is he's really fun. And I think
Yeah.
he writes a lot of checks where it's an aggressive, correct decision that his arm can't cash. Right. So I think it would be fun to have a guy whose arm can cash those checks to learn
Yeah.
from Nick Mullins and having Nick Mullins on the team and be like, I want a guy to have Nick Mullins' mindset and be more physically gifted and able to actually execute what's going on. And I think you
Yeah.
actually have a really good quarterback. But
Always
um,
kind of fun.
so so your answer is you don't like any of the three guys.
Okay, so let me
What's
answer
your
your question.
yeah?
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, and that's a totally valid question, right? Like answer. I don't like any of McCarthy, Penix, and Nix to
At
uh
11.
to draft them at 11 is what you're
At
saying.
11.
If
Yes.
it's a we draft somebody else at 11, move back up into the back of the first round for somebody, like that's another plausible scenario for the Vikings. What's your order of preference for those three guys?
Okay, so for those three guys, I think I'm going. I've fluctuated a lot on these two guys, but between the next two, um, because I like them both for very different reasons. I dislike them both for very different reasons. I think right now, if I could move back up into the low first and walk away with Bo Nix, I'm pretty happy. And the reason I like Bo Nix is I was excited about him as a freshman in college. Okay, this is the sort of the backstory
Yes.
here. And I even told some friends, one of them may be on the call here with me, that I was kind of interested in this player.
And he was
His
awful at
college,
Auburn for 3 years.
he was
Awful.
horrible. He was horrible right out of the gate, just absolutely terrible. I got off of my excitement for him immediately as soon as I watched him play. I was like, "Oh, this kid's not ready. I don't think he has it or whatever." But he stuck with it and improved year after year towards the end of his college career and stayed a first round prospect, which I think is a testament to him and working through it. He's on the older side, and he doesn't have the injury history that Penix has. So to me, I'm looking at the two of them, and they're kind of on equal ground for me. Bo Nix has a lot of physical talent. I think he would fit into our system really well, and I could get excited about him. I could get excited about aspects of his game, and it'd be easier for me to kind of stomach that. I think with Penix, I'd be worried about Vikings curses immediately. I'd be worried about, oh, he's gonna be awesome. He's gonna play incredible, and then he's gonna tear his ACL in the NFC Championship game, and he'll never be the same. That's the kind of thing I'd be worried about with Penix, and I won't be able to shake that fear as a Vikings fan. So I think like if it comes down to the two of those guys, I think I'm going with Knicks purely because of the same age and injury history. So that's where I'm at with those two. I think Penix is more talented, uh, but I think Knicks is a safer bet.
So the implication is you are all the way out on JJ McCarthy. Would you say that that is an accurate
Oh.
assessment?
This is the hardest thing for me because JJ is probably the guy that Coach Kev wants. He's probably the exact player that Kev's had circled. He's a the offense executor who gets the ball there on time and doesn't tries not to make too many mistakes and he can run around a little bit, so that's kind of exciting. So I'm fully aware that McCarthy may be the guy. So if he is the guy, I'll get in line. I'm not going to be disappointed. I'm going to
You're
find
not going to be
reasons.
happy about it. You're not going to
No,
be
I
happy
I
about it. The
will. I'll be
beatings will
happy. I will.
continue until morale improves. Is how Gregg's going to
I
treat
will.
this.
No, no. I swear. I promise. I will watch every second of JJ McCarthy's career, and I'll find reasons to get excited, and it's going to be awesome. But if you're asking me in a vacuum, is he my least favorite first round candidate this year? Yes, he is. And there's a few reasons for that. Some of them are fair, some of them are completely unfair. I think the main thing is, Matt, and you may disagree with me on this, I'm not convinced that he can throw a football more than one way. And I know that a lot of that has to do with how he was asked to play at Michigan. and it's probably completely unfair. And maybe he goes into the combine and he shows his stuff, and I'm like, oh, okay, he can do some things. Um, so we'll see. I'm going to
Do you
try to
mean
keep
like
an open
with
mind.
touch, like throw the ball with touch? Like
Yes.
all he does is throw like you know, really the Brett Favre break everybody receivers' fingers kind of balls.
All I've seen, and I've watched, an okay amount, a little bit. I've watched a little bit of the kid at this point. Not everything. I haven't watched everything. So someone may be able to find clips that would prove me wrong, and I would accept that. All I've seen from him when I've watched him is laser balls, right down the center of the field a lot of the time. I have not seen a lot of other stuff. So it's hard for me to say, can he make those throws? I don't know. Maybe he wasn't asked to, or whatever. Um, but it's one of those things that, like, as the armchair guy who's just like watching YouTube videos or whatever, one of the things I really gravitate towards with quarterbacks over the years is I like to see a lot of different kinds of throws. I like to see, rainbow shots, and I like to see the straight line,
Yeah.
darts, the Brett Favre throws. I like to see the sideline stuff. I like to see a wide variety. I even like to see how the guy throws screens and how he throws to halfbacks in the backfield. Quinn Ewers, one of my favorite things about Quinn is that he throws those little banana routes and stuff with a little bit of flair. He kind of like whips it out there, and it's got a little bit of an arc to it, and it's very soft to catch, and the player doesn't have to think too much. He knows the ball's going to get there, and
Yep.
he knows it's going to be in his hands. So I like to see a lot of variety with throw types, and with JJ, I just didn't see it at all, like, to a shocking degree. And I was watching for it. I'm like, I just want to see one throw that's not that type of throw, and I personally didn't see it. So it makes me very nervous about him. But again, he's super young. He's definitely raw. He can run around a little bit. There are things I can get excited about with JJ, and I will. I promise I will, if that's the dude.
Yeah. So I flipping this back to me, right, on quarterbacks, JJ McCarthy, I'm in on 11, which is the
Okay.
opposite of what you are. And I am pretty much all the way out on both Penix and Nix. Like, I just don't think they're super valid prospects. I don't think Michael Penix has the accuracy or the mobility, and the injury history is a major concern to me. I think if you look at the story of players who have been successful, who are older at quarterback. The obvious answer is Joe Burrow, right? Who wasn't able to get a starting job at Ohio State and then eventually transferred to LSU and became very successful. One of the things that Joe Burrow had was a complete command of that LSU offense, and they had vastly superior talent, right? I mean, they had Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, right? They had two of the players who became two of the best receivers in the NFL the day they stepped on the NFL field. Joe Burrow had that as a quarterback, and he's still a great NFL quarterback, right? So, the fact that Michael Penix had Rome Odunze and Jalen Polk and all this NFL talent at receiver, right, isn't that big of a concern to me. I think that with him in particular, like you saw, like he had that Indiana team playing really well when he was in Indiana before the injuries and the transfer, and he made like Ty Freifogel, if you remember that name, like a wide receiver prospect who was NFL draftable. Obviously, he completely flamed out, but I think Michael Penix deserves credit for making that happen. I think I think the problem I have with Penix is he's not nearly as accurate to me as Joe Burrow was, and he has basically no mobility after those injuries. It like I and I don't have a ton of exposure to these guys. I don't watch college football on a regular basis. I did not watch a single Oregon game, right? So my Bo Nix is basically like a narrative kind of take and a couple things I've heard about him from people I trust who do quarterbacks, right? But I did watch the college football playoff games, right? And I don't think Michael Penix, despite having an excellent game in terms of accuracy against Texas, showed the mobility like a CJ Stroud did against Georgia the year before, right? Where mobility and pocket movement and that sort of thing was a huge question for Stroud because he was playing against a dominant offensive line and didn't have to do anything. Penix couldn't do any, and his OL was getting crushed. They were getting dominated by Michigan in the championship game. Penix couldn't do anything with it. So that's a major red flag to me. I need a quarterback to have that prerequisite level of mobility. And I just don't think Penix has it after the injuries. If we have an uninjured Penix, maybe it's a completely different timeline for him, but it just concerns me too much that that's going to be an issue for me to be in on him as a quarterback. Bo Nix, I mean, we talked about the narrative, right? He was bad at Oregon, and he kind of built himself up. I think that's where you could kind of sell yourself on a Joe Burrow type narrative. He put up incredible numbers at Oregon over the 2 seasons he was there. Um, I've got major accuracy concerns with him. It sounds like he was really, really rough at the Senior Bowl in terms of accuracy. And granted, that's playing with people he never played with before. But for a player to be a first round prospect at Bo Nix's age, like my concern is he got to an age where he's 22, 23 years old. He's playing against a bunch of 18 and 19-year-olds, and he's just dominating them. And that's another thing we've seen with these older prospects that come out, right? I think that's kind of a Hendon Hooker thing.
Yeah, it's a very weird time these last couple of drafts, and we have one more coming up with the COVID guys who kind of
Yeah.
they were allowed to stay in school forever. So it does muddy these waters
So
a lot.
that's my major concern with Bo Nix, and I don't think and maybe watching it, I won't have that concern, but I think I will. Continuing moving on. JJ
Yeah,
McCarthy, to me, I think has all the tools you want in a quarterback. I think I really like, honestly, what I saw from him in both playoff games. Like he was a pretty limited in terms of what he was asked to do, and people talked about how he didn't do much. When he needed to do stuff, when he needed to scramble out of the pocket, make a throw on the run, he was pinpoint accurate in almost every scenario that I saw him do. So I guess you've raised an interesting point that I haven't really heard before about the ability to layer throws, which I agree with is an important thing for NFL quarterbacks. I also think that McCarthy's pocket movement and efficiency has been good, and his ability to go like I think he needs to improve on his ability to read the game and go through reads maybe a little bit more quickly, or on a more understanding of the defense where we're going to attack and hit the right guy on time. But I think from a footwork perspective and from a timing and from like a getting into the rhythm of the offense, I think he has the capacity to do that. So that's a big thing for me. I think that McCarthy becomes an option for the Vikings if they bring Kirk Cousins back to allow McCarthy to sit for a season, right? In the scenario where they have to draft McCarthy, he's young enough that I want to allow him to sit. So that's kind of where it comes into me. Like McCarthy and Cousins would be more of a package deal for me. And McCarthy has absolutely the requisite size. He's a little bit skinny, but he's 6'3". He's got enough of an arm. And I think, from a size perspective, from a movement skills perspective, he's gonna hold up in the NFL. He's not a 6 foot tall quarterback, right? Who's maybe we're gonna have questions about. And I think Bo Nix is like 6'1", isn't he? Isn't he on the smaller end for a quarterback?
I
Like, not
thought
that
he was.
that's not that that matters too much, but it's a little bit of a question mark to
No, it's
me
a
when
thing.
guys
It's a
come into
thing.
the league.
I
And
agree.
Jaden
6'2", by the way.
Daniels, go ahead.
2,
6'2".
6'2".
Yeah. Jaden Daniels is like skinny for a quarterback prospect. Or like I didn't talk too much about Jaden Daniels. My major concern with Jaden Daniels, and like we're talking about these top three guys, and I'm making comparisons that are like the loftiest possible comparisons, right? But like Jaden Daniels' play style, you can't help but say, Lamar Jackson, right? Like I think he's an incredibly efficient passer, and I think he works well from the pocket, which is something Lamar Jackson did all the way going back to Louisville,
It's
right?
just a comparison, people. Everyone calm
And
down.
he is a hyper good athlete. The
Right.
major difference to me between well, besides age, right? Lamar Jackson was a 20-year-old coming into the NFL. That matters a lot too. I just went on a rant about the dominance of older prospects and how that can really change. The major difference to me is Jaden Daniels does not know how to protect himself at all. Right? You can put together a wait to an early 2000s hit stick reel of football plays with Jaden Daniels. Like he might be the only player who leads you to be able to do that in this day where we have so much correct stuff to protect players, right? But like he gets ragdolled all the time. And you watch Lamar Jackson, Lamar never takes a big hit. What killed
Yeah.
RG3 was his inability to take and I'm comparing him against athletic quarterbacks because I think it really, matters when those if
No, it's real.
athleticism is one of those guys' strengths, you
That
want
was
to run the ball with them.
not just
They can't,
athleticism.
yeah,
not just it's not even just athleticism, Matt. That was one of the things that, especially later in his career, people would talk about with Tom Brady all the time. Tom Brady got to a point where he knew exactly when a defender was breathing down his neck, and he could dirt a ball and avoid even simple hits. He got to the point
Or
where he had such control, he was barely ever getting touched.
I
And
mean, Tom would do that, and he
yeah,
would just fall down on sacks. Like guys would get close
exactly.
to
He
him,
would just
and he'd just fall
protect
down.
himself.
And
Yeah,
Peyton did that at the end of his career too. But when a
right.
guy is running with the ball, like Lamar Jackson has such good spatial awareness that he always avoids big hits. He's always like being tumbled around in a circle or like goes down and doesn't take a big shot. Right? Like he always has the slipperiness and the spatial awareness of everybody that's around him to avoid taking a major like hit that'll like crush ribs or something like that. Right?
Protecting yourself is a skill, is
Yeah.
what you're trying to
And
say, I think,
Jaden
and I
Daniels
agree.
does not have that. So that's my major concern with him and why I wouldn't be full send with him and kind of as a prospect.
Yeah, I
But yeah,
think that's a great point. So we're pretty much in agreement on a lot of this. Like I said, I'm not super excited about Knicks or Penix, but um, it's not like I'm dying to have either one of them, but I would accept it. So just respond to your JJ point, and to be fair to McCarthy, it's like I I don't know what he was asked to do. I think the biggest thing with him is I think you haven't seen everything that he can do, and that could be really exciting too. There
hmm
might be discoveries to make. Like if we draft JJ and he comes out there in his first preseason game throws the exact type of ball that I said he couldn't throw. I mean, that's a discovery. It's really exciting. It's like, oh
yeah,
shit, he can
yeah,
play. This is great. So I have reasons to get behind all these guys, and I think JJ's age, the fact that he's probably Coach Kev's guy, I just have this feeling. Um, I can see it, and I'm gonna get excited about it for the reasons that you said. I think there's stuff to get excited about with him. He's like a present that we get to unwrap and see what's inside, and that's kind of cool in its own way too.
So, and I think this can wrap up our quarterback discussion. But
Yeah,
the thing I want to say about quarterbacks and evaluating all players in general is a player who did not do something in college or wasn't asked to do something in college was not necessarily incapable of doing that thing, right?
amen.
So JJ McCarthy, Michigan, running the ball 20 times in a row against Penn State, right? That's because they wanted to get out of the ball game and they knew their running backs were good. That doesn't mean that JJ McCarthy can't lead. You look at what JJ McCarthy was able to do on third downs and fourth downs. He was actually incredibly efficient, probably the best quarterback in the class in those scenarios. So when he's in pressure situations, when he needs to throw the ball, he appeared to be able to do that, right?
Yep.
You have to watch and project. You have to watch the guys and project based on the skill set that you can see on tape what they will be able to do in those situations rather than just saying he wasn't asked to do that, so he can't do that. And that's a
Justin
very,
Herbert. Justin Herbert never took a snap under
yep.
center in college. And that was a knock on him in the draft.
Well,
Oh, he never did that.
and they had a
And
Mickey Mouse offense that was screens and deep shots, and there was like Justin Herbert isn't accurate. Can Justin Herbert read a defense? And he was immediately awesome. He's an
immediately,
outlier case, right?
yep,
He's an outlier case because of how great he was instantaneously. But
right.
again, like you
But
have
the
to
point
look at
is,
these guys in context.
right, that's the point, is me sitting here saying, I would never say JJ's not going to be successful. I have no idea.
Yep.
I just know that I haven't seen the stuff that I typically like to see, and that's it.
Yep.
So, but it's an exciting offseason. It's an exciting year. We've talked about the quarterbacks. That's the big hot thing. Are there a couple of guys that you're looking at in this draft that you think would be great Vikings that are not related to the quarterback position? Guys that you're like, ooh, I kind of have my sights on him in maybe the second or the third or whatever.
I haven't gone deep enough to really know anything. I love everything I saw out of the Senior Bowl, out of that cornerback from Toledo, but he's probably going in the first round. So
First round.
Quinyon Mitchell or whatever his name was.
Yeah, we
Uh,
reportedly spent some time with him and stuff as well.
yeah. I mean, I love what I saw from him, but I don't have any guys in the draft. Like I'm not deep enough into it yet to really be like, oh, this is a guy I want to stake my claim on.
Okay, I have a couple. I'm just going to
Go
throw them
for
out
him.
there.
Yeah,
Okay.
let's throw him out.
All right. So we've got defensive tackle. Obviously, the hot name and the one. Uh, oh, I'm totally drawing a blank. Oh my God, Matt, save me.
Byron Murphy or the other
Byron
one,
Murphy.
Jersey Newton, probably.
Yeah, yeah. The one I wanted to talk about was Byron because I did watch some Texas football over the last few years, and I've seen this kid play. Really like Byron Murphy. I really like a lot of those Texas defenders that are going to be coming out in the next
I
few
was going to
years. I
say
think
Tavondre Sweat's the hot. I mean, he's the one who's like 380 pounds or whatever.
I also like him. I would love it if we could walk away with a big, huge defensive tackle in this draft. Those Texas guys are definitely up my alley. I would love to have one of them. Um, that's one name. I know that this is a dream, and it's so unlikely given how many needs we have. But I have my eye on two running backs in this draft as well. Um, I think running back is a position that we have neglected for far too long.
I am
Um,
all for taking like a late round 3, early round 4 running back in this draft. I think the Vikings need to do something at running back specifically. I wouldn't even mind going out and paying a little bit for a free agent, which is typically against my running backs don't matter thing. I but anyway, go ahead on your running
Saquon
backs who you
Barkley might
like.
be out there. Yeah,
Yeah.
Saquon Barkley might be out there. There's some options. I personally would love to draft one, and there's two guys that I have my eyes on. One is a unrealistic, most likely in that third to fourth round range, which I agree. By the way, I would like us to be looking at it back in that range. That's kind of where I'm at too. One is pretty unlikely to be available. I'll talk about him next. But the guy that I think might be available for us, at least based on early buzz, is Audric Estime out of Notre Dame.
Okay. Yep.
Did you catch any Audric
No,
Estime?
I really don't know anything about the running backs in this class. Like I've heard some names, but I don't know anything about them. And my understanding of this class is there's not like a first round draft pick in running back. Like there's really not a guy who rises above anything else. There may be some second rounders, but there's not a clear cut like, oh, this guy can play in all 3 phases of the game, right?
Yeah.
And is an explosive, interesting talent on top of that.
Yeah. Running back is so hard to evaluate that way these days. I don't really know if I agree with that, at least in terms of traditional value. But I think in terms of how things are done now, that's probably true. It's at least it's not a very hype filled class, but
Yeah.
there's actually some guys that are very, very talented that I think have potential to actually be really, really great NFL
So
back.
Audric Estime is one for you. Who's the other one who's maybe a bit more of a pipe dream?
Yeah, and just really quickly about Estime, he's big and strong. He'd be able to take on some of those goal line touches we struggled with, but he's also got enough speed and enough quickness with that big body that he's very exciting. But the guy that I'm really in love with, and I've been watching him play ever since his freshman year, when he was 17 years old, playing against 23-year-olds and holding his own. His name's Braylon Allen, and
Yes.
yeah, if you have not seen Braylon Allen, regardless of whether the Vikings even have a chance at him, if you want to win your fantasy league this year, or whatever, and you're looking for cheap potential running backs to go after, you got to take a look at Braylon Allen. I think he's got the potential to be kind of a uh, some kind of weird combo of Derrick Henry and pick a big running back who could catch Leonard Fournette, or so. He's got a really interesting mix of skill and ability. He can catch the ball. He can run a route. But he's huge. He's 6'2", 245 pounds. He gets bigger every single year. He's only going to be 20 years old year one as a rookie. So you've got a lot of runway there. Just an extremely, extremely effective back in college and really fun to watch, like super fun to watch. Go watch some highlights of Braylon Allen. That's my running back dream this year. I'm really hoping we end up with him somehow. Very unlikely, but that's my guy.
Yeah, I remember seeing a little bit of him as a freshman kind of and being like actually impressive as a 17-year-old. So yeah,
It's insane. It's
that
insane. Go watch his freshman year and just keep in the back of your head the whole time. This kid is 17 years old.
and
Like
and
he's
it is kind of interesting, right? Because he never took off as like everybody knew Bijan was a top prospect from the minute like he stepped onto the field at Texas,
Yep.
right? Like everybody kind of knew Leonard Fournette or whatever back in the
Jahmyr
day.
Gibbs,
Or
lots of buzz for
yeah.
Gibbs.
So there wasn't anybody who came into this year having that massive amount of buzz, which is why I think probably we're going to see early second be the first time a running back comes off the board, maybe
Yep.
even down into the mid-second round, which puts the Vikings in the range to potentially get one of those guys. And again, I don't want to spend critical draft capital on running back. I don't think that's necessarily smart, but I do want to add to our room, which was terrible last year, frankly. So
Terrible, absolutely terrible, and not fun. It's just
yeah,
I just want to have some fun watching the running game, man. I think
yeah.
one of those two players could really do it for us.
So
But
I think with that, why don't we wrap it up here, Greg? I know we had some stuff
yeah,
on the board about the salary cap and like free agents, but we
we
kind of went over an hour already, so we should
we
probably
were
give it.
like, oh, this will be like a short one, But
Yeah,
we haven't seen each other in a while, We're chatting. It's good. All right, so we let's. Do you want to just talk about the salary cap really quickly? I know you did a lot
I
of
think
work
we
on
can
this.
save that for a
Okay.
new episode, maybe next week or something, where we talk about free agency and what we might want the Vikings to do there.
What you're witnessing right now, folks, is extremely rare in the history of this show. Matt is trying to shut me up. So
Yeah,
let's.
100% true. A
Oh my
hundred
God!
percent
All right,
true.
let's wrap it up, man. Anything you want to say to the people?
No, I mean, I had a lot of fun getting back here and actually talking about football. So look for us to record again in the coming couple weeks. We'll try to find time to do it. The off season, it's a little bit less structured, so we may be recording on weekends or something like that, just as we have more time availability. Because during the season, you record on a Saturday, and it's pretty much a complete waste, right? You kind of have to do it by Thursday night for it to
Yeah,
really have that kind of value. So it'll be a little bit easier to find time to record as we're not trying to plug in during all of our individual weeknight commitments that we have.
yeah,
So
absolutely,
I'm looking forward to that.
absolutely. You can find us by searching for Kindred Skulls on YouTube. That's our video content. You can check out at Kindred Skulls on Twitter. You can find Matt at
Yep.
Fries Football on on Twitter. You can find our other co-host Nick Olson by searching Nick Olson NFL on Twitter. That's his handle. You can find me on Instagram by looking for the Gregg Blake. Yeah, that's it. Listen to us, folks. We're still around. We love you.
The promo
Big time.
read like a funeral right there. That was pretty great. Come in for some hugs. Goodbye.
Oh
We love
no.
you.
Cool, baby.
Another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all cheer on behind, and we'll score the